Hello everybody, my name is Mark, this is Why I Hate the World. How you guys doing? So one thing that I find in exploring social justice circles is this notion that class and privilege are a necessary part of oppression. And if you're part of a privileged class, then you cannot be a victim of discrimination or bigotry. So you hear that a lot in the, for example, the power plus privilege definition of racism, right? Which basically says that all white people are privileged, and if you're privileged, then you can't be discriminated against, and thus you can't be a victim of racism, which is complete bullshit. Because the reason, the faulty reasoning here is it completely ignores the individual, right? Individuals definitely can and are, victims of discrimination, right? White people can be victims of, racism. But what they mean by that, right, or well, rather what I interpret it to mean, because I don't want to speak for everybody, but what I think what they're trying to get at is that you're not the victim of institutional racism, right? You don't have the historical and institutional background. There isn't a history of racism against white people, and that's definitely true. White people weren't slaves in America, right? White people weren't separated and segregated and thrown to the back of the bus and given the shitty schools and stuff like that. And that's definitely true, right? But to just say that you're white, you're privileged, and that way you can't be discriminated against is, I think, oversimplifying it, and does a lot to push away people that otherwise would agree with the old definition of racism, which is treating people differently because of the color of their skin or their race, or their religion or their ethnicity or anything else. That all kind of falls under the general definition of racism nowadays anyway, right? A lot of people would agree with that old definition and still do, but don't agree with this new definition. I think that's where that split comes from. That's why we're seeing this backlash against the social justice warrior people. So anyway, but this video is about sexism, right? And the same way that white people can be a victim of racism, men can also be a victim of sexism. Okay. And I know this because as a man, I've been a victim of it, many times. Now, I'm going to say, the first thing I'm going to say is that, I don't believe that there is a culture of, institutional sexism against men in this country. I think it's the opposite, right? I'm the first to admit that. There isn't really, not in the same way that there were against women, there's definitely... right, institutional sexism against women. It's only been in the last couple of generations that women have been able to, vote and get equal rights with, men. And, but not only just that, is that they can just be seen as like normal people with wants and desires, and not as, automatically as mothers or homemakers or, it's not that long ago that the idea of a woman in the workforce was a strange thing, or even a woman driving was a strange thing. It's not that long ago that, you were expected as a woman to just grow up and have babies and stay home and make dinner and shit like that. Or if you got a job, it'd be something like, teacher, right? Or nurse or some shit like that, that your career prospects were very limited, that kind of thing. That's maybe, a couple of, a generation ago, right? So, yes, I acknowledge that. That's definitely true, right? And that's, the objectives of second wave feminism, I think, have, gone a long way to eliminate all of that. We almost had a woman president, right? We should have had a woman president. But, so it's as far as that, breaking the glass ceiling and reversing social norms and stuff like that, and, putting women on equal ground, that's definitely, they've gotten a long way. But, I think that one of the big problems with third wave feminism is that they're falling into that same trap that you get, with the social justice, racism people saying that, all men are privileged, right? Since the fact that I have a penis means I'm privileged, and thus I can't be a victim of sexism, right? That's not true at all, you know. I can tell you that it's, you know, it definitely falls into what you would call the microaggression category, okay? There's been very, very few instances where I've been told I can't do something because I'm a man. Although that has happened in the past, right? But it usually falls into, yeah, like you would say microaggression, you know, things like everybody instantly assumes you're a pervert. For example, I'm out. Here's a story from me. I'm out walking my dog with my wife. Right, we're walking. We're playing Pokemon Go. Okay, so I'm not even looking up. I'm looking at my phone and shit. And there's a high school next to where I live. These two girls come walking up, right? And I'm walking, dog in one hand, phone in the other, like this, right? And I look up for a second so I don't bump into them, right? And I make eye contact with one of the girls, and her friend looks at me and goes, "She's a teenager." And then with this like sort of, you know, "What the fuck are you doing, you pervert" kind of look. And it's like, I'm just looking up to make sure I don't bump into you, you know, and automatically you assume that I'm a child molester, right? Shit like that. So that's, you know, you could call that a microaggression. Now the thing is that I don't take offense to that kind of thing, right? Because it's justified, okay? Because there are a lot of child molesters and they all happen to be men. I mean, when's the last time, you know, whenever you hear about a female child molester, it's usually a teacher who has sex with a student or something, right? Male child molesters are like, you know, far outweigh the female ones, right? So I'm not like, you know, the thing is I can't get too offended at that. What I do get, you know, but it is a microaggression. It's just sort of like, you know, don't automatically assume that every man you meet is like a, you know, pervert or a fucking child molester. It's like, I'm just making sure I don't bump into you. Fuck, you know? What do you want me to do? Just not look at you and shit and walk by? I mean, that's kind of shit like that, you know? That kind of thing happens a lot, you know. Every time you accidentally brush up against a woman in line somewhere, like you're in if you're at a Starbucks or something, and you're just like, you know, you're waiting in line and you accidentally touch her with your shoulder or some shit, she thinks you're trying to molest her, that kind of thing. You get dirty looks from women a lot. Another thing that kind of falls into the microaggression category is that when you don't respond to now I'm gonna get some shit for this, okay? But if you don't respond, like if a woman flirts with you and you don't respond to her, she'll fucking lose her mind over that. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, there are, you know, certain, now this is I don't want to stereotype all women by saying this, but there are certain women out there that know they're attractive and use that to get things, okay? And this happens a lot. And it's sort of like, you'll see it in the workplace, you'll see it among groups of friends, that kind of thing. And they subtly flirt with you in order to get favors, right? Every man out there watching this knows that this shit happens, okay? And, you know, a lot of women out there watching this don't want to admit that it happens, but it does. All right. And the thing is that if you don't respond to that, those women get pissed at you, right? And suddenly you're not, you know, you're their enemy, okay? And maybe it's because, I don't know, maybe I'm just not good looking enough or whatever. Then you get this sort of just blatant in your face kind of, you know, parts of sexism that can ruin your life. For example, I had several years ago, a woman I work with subtly hint that she was going to accuse me of sexual harassment if I didn't, like, you know, if I didn't, like, stop being her supervisor. Here's the thing, is that this happened several years ago, all right? And I had a few people that work under me, and there was this one, you know, woman. She just did a really incredibly awful job. And she would be out, like, you know, 1 or 2 days a week. Like, there was 1 month in August where she was out 8 days in a month, right? You can't call out of work 8 days, right? And other people were complaining to me that she was doing a shitty job and they didn't want her to work on their projects, right? And I'm, like, you know, supposed to be responsible for this person's output. So I, you know, would tell her to work harder and shit like that, and like, come on, you know. And she started just like completely fucking like, you know, just basically telling me to like, you know, being incredibly insubordinate, you know, telling me to fuck off to my face, shit like that, refusing to work. And she kind of made a little hint at it. She made a hint that if I didn't like stop criticizing her at work and stop actually trying to get her to work, which is my job as her supervisor, that she was gonna accuse me of sexual harassment. You know, she made that, you know, she went there, right? So what am I supposed to do in that situation, right? I backed off. I was like, all right, fine, you know, fuck it. And you know what I did? I covered for her. Okay, for several months after that. I basically just let her do whatever she wanted, because this is what would happen, and this is not fair at all, and a lot of people might give me shit for this, right? But this is exactly what would happen in today's, you know, environment, is that I would get fired, right, without any kind of recourse whatsoever. Now, what's supposed to happen in that situation is that you're supposed to go to your supervisor, right, and file a complaint, right, and say this, and this is happening, and then they're supposed to handle it. And they're supposed to separate you or whatever, or have you talk it out, or put you on different projects, whatever. They're supposed to handle that kind of thing, right? In real life, what happens is that, you know, I complain, they tell me to, like, you know, to suck it up. She complains, I get fired. That's what happens in today's corporate environment, right? So, you know, because the company doesn't want to take any risks, you know, especially at the time I was a contractor at the time, and they could just fire you for any reason when you're a contractor. Right. And if you want to pursue it, then you have to hire a lawyer and all this other shit, and it's like all expensive, and 99% of the time people just say fuck it and go on and move on with their lives. So I did what, you know, I felt my only choice was in this situation was to just back off. And not only did I back off, I actually had to do some of her work for her because she did such a shitty job at it. And, long story short, I eventually got her moved off of my team, and she got herself fired, right? So that everything worked out in the end, and I'm still with the company, right? This is some 7 years later. But that's just, an example, right, of that. I mean, I would call that sexism. You know, she basically knew that she had a tool that she could use to enforce her will, and that the corporate culture would take her side. And that's sort of, that's bullying, bullying. It's but I would call it sexism for sure. I would call that an example of institutional sexism. Now, the thing is that I acknowledge is that it's usually overwhelmingly lopsided the other way around. It's usually, incredibly lopsided against women and for men. So it's like I don't get, I don't get mad at this kind of thing, right? I don't even think that it's that big of a problem, but I do, but you do have to acknowledge that it exists, right? And to say that it doesn't exist, to say that men can't be a victim of sexism is just naive. And it's just going to drive a wedge against people who would otherwise support you. So anyway, this video went on way longer than it should have. Adios, folks. See you guys.